How did we go from this to this? Film is a unique medium in many ways, but one of the things that makes it so compelling is how well it can capture spectacle. You can read about a battle in a book, or watch a fight scene on stage, and while theater and literature have their advantages over film,
Valentine Hall!
they're reliant on the audience to fill in the grander details with their own imaginations.
Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France?
Whereas with film, it's right there in front of you. You can see the massive army advancing. You can hear the clink of their armor as they march. You can put the camera on a helicopter, or a drone, or just create the whole scene from nothing on a computer and achieve points of view that would otherwise be impossible. And through the awesome power of editing, you can utilize picture and sound to elicit a visceral reaction from your viewer. For more than 100 years, the art of cinema has had a love affair with big battle scenes, resulting in some of the most memorable moments in film history. And like any long-term relationship, it's had its ups and its downs. In my opinion, there are three major elements to consider when judging the effectiveness of a battle scene. 1. Spectacle. Is it a feast for the eyes? Is it big, grand, and epic? 2. Characters committed toward taking action. Do we follow characters that we care about, and do their actions propel the story forward? And 3. Technical execution. Are the stakes clear? Can we follow the action, or is it muddled and messy? It's a rare battle scene that ticks all three boxes, and only a handful of filmmakers have been able to achieve it. It was a long road from this to this. Let's walk it together. In 1915, D.W. Griffith made the epic film The Birth of a Nation. This sequence, showing our main characters fighting in the American Civil War, is commonly regarded as the first battle scene ever put to film. By modern standards, it's certainly nothing to write home about, but it does have a sense of scale that was unheard of before. Griffith was working with a cast of thousands, smoke bombs, cannons, muskets, so he consciously used huge wide shots to show it all off. And while no one could ever question the immensity of Griffith's achievement, the camera always remains detached from the action on screen. It's a cold, distant presentation of a battle. Compare these images you're looking at now to this. I put it to you that this movie, the 1938 film Alexander Nevsky by Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein, set the bar so high for movie battles that it took 70 years to top. The battle on the ice sequence is tense and exciting, even to this day. Its influence on filmmaking can't be overstated. We have a suspenseful lead-up to the cavalry charge, an obligatory revenge for a fallen comrade kill, emphasis on comrade of course, and a satisfying duel between the hero and the main villain. And then this guy fights a bunch of Germans with a log. I just feel the need to mention that. The mighty, evil Teutonic Knights are robotic and monstrous, while the heroic underdog Russians are relatable and human. Sound familiar? And the amazing thing is, Eisenstein pulled all of this out of his ass. The narrative beats and visual shorthands in the action, which seem so ubiquitous to us today, pretty much began here. While Americans were making derivative swashbuckling flicks, Eisenstein and the Soviets were breaking new ground. We might have won the space race, but they sure as hell won the action scene race. So the next time you're watching Braveheart, or Gladiator, or Lord of the Rings, raise a glass to Sergei Eisenstein, genius film director and hero of socialist labor. Nostrovia! Back in the good old US of A, the Griffith wide shot reigned supreme. For decades. And the basic cinematic language of battle scenes remained unchanged. The rule of thumb was, if you got it, flaunt it. Wait, hold on. Could you play that back? Okay. If a production could afford elaborate sets and a ton of extras, they would try to get the most mileage out of it as possible. Even great directors like David Lean fell into this trap. And yes, it makes sense from a filmmaking standpoint. Spectacle is a crucial ingredient to filming a battle scene, but you can't make good gumbo without chicken, shrimp, or sausage. You need the meat of technical execution and characters committed toward taking action to make your audience care. And yet, movie battles of the 40s and 50s were consistently lackluster. The irony is that the same generation that made love, not war, also revolutionized the way we portray large groups of men killing each other on screen. The shift in style began in 1960 with the Stanley Kubrick film Spartacus. Kubrick was the first American filmmaker to tick all 3 battle boxes. In this climactic battle, the monolithic Roman army advances on the outnumbered slaves in a sequence clearly inspired by the cavalry charge in Alexander Nevsky. The excellent score by Alex North builds tension, and consistent cutaways to the major characters never let us forget the lives, or reputations, that are at stake here. The ensuing battle is far more violent than the bloodless sword and sandal epics of the 50s, and foreground action keeps the frame busy with chaotic movement, a little trick employed by countless filmmakers in the years since. 5 years later, another famous director, Orson Welles, advanced the art of battles even further in a little-known Shakespearean fanfiction called Chimes at Midnight. This Battle of Shrewsbury sequence is all about the editing. The cutting is quick and kinetic. It gives the fighting an unchoreographed, raw feeling. The stabbings and hits look and sound like they really hurt. The scene is completely chaotic. You can't even tell who is on which side, so it doesn't do too well in the character department. But it has plenty of spectacle and an excellent execution. There's no heroism here, only blood and mud and people dying horrible deaths. It's an unapologetic portrayal of the savagery of war, a theme that would only become more prevalent as filmmakers reacted to the cultural impact of the Vietnam War. The 1970s weren't huge on battle scenes, but it was nonetheless a pivotal time for how violence was depicted on screen. As the independent film movement grew, so did audiences' appetites for movies that challenged preconceived notions about just conduct in war. And so heroic Indian fighters became bloodthirsty genocidalists, honorable medieval knights became brutal warlords, and classist bullies.
Come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
In 1989, God Among Men, Kenneth Branagh directed and starred in a film adaptation of Henry V, which propelled him into stardom practically overnight. The film got nominated for a bunch of Oscars, and did pretty well at the box office considering that it doesn't have any naked women or explosions. Part of the film's success was due to its creativity in utilizing a severely limited budget, and Branagh pinched pennies throughout the first 2/3 of the film to deliver an epic conclusion depicting the Battle of Agincourt. Drawing inspiration from Chimes at Midnight, the battle in Henry V is a muddy, filthy, desperate struggle for survival. According to Branagh himself, the anti-war sentiment of his Henry V is meant to be a direct contrast to Laurence Olivier's World War II-era adaptation. It's no coincidence that Olivier chose to adapt Henry V, a play where an English army invades France, the same year as the D-Day landings. And it's very, oh hip hip hurrah gentlemen, let's show those Jerry's what. But the reason the Battle of Agincourt sequence succeeds is not due to its evocative cinematography or clever editing, but because it emotionally resonates with the audience. We're watching characters we care about fight for their lives. Many die horribly, but even in victory, the survivors need to reckon with the demoralizing truth that they haven't been fighting for a just cause. Even though the technical execution of this battle is super effective, there's something missing. A sense of the tactics the English used to defeat the French. If we could take Branagh's cinematic gusto and pair it with a big budget so we can see really big troop movements or whatnot, then I think we would have the perfect movie battle. Oh yeah, Braveheart, motherfucker. Arguably the best big fight ever put on film is the epic, half-hour-long Battle of Stirling scene. But you can't have a Battle of Stirling Bridge without a fucking bridge, you numpty! Yeah, the historical battle had a bridge in it, but as many other YouTubers have smugly pointed out, a nauseating amount really, that's the least of Braveheart's inaccuracy problems. In any case, it doesn't really matter. The battles in Braveheart have everything. Expert camera work, groundbreaking editing, emotional resonance, and a good handle on strategy. For example, at Stirling, the English cavalry is obliterated on the Scottish Schiltrom. The Scots pin the English infantry down while their light cavalry swings around, takes out the longbowmen, and enters the main melee in a pincer movement, thus winning the battle. It's simple stuff, but the tactics are presented clearly, so the audience can follow and understand. This sequence was shot over 6 weeks, and thanks to Mel Gibson's capable and energetic leadership, this piece of man candy, editor Stephen Rosenblum, had everything he needed to craft an unforgettable battle scene. There are hundreds of cuts in Braveheart's action scenes, and not a single one is unmotivated or awkward. They blend seamlessly and rhythmically. Mel Gibson may have taken home the Golden Boy for Best Director, but I doubt that would have happened without the battle scenes. And the reason the battle scenes are so awesome is because this guy is a friggin' genius. Henry V may have ushered in the golden era of battle scenes, but Braveheart is its greatest legacy. And while there were many well-executed and exciting battle scenes in the following years, most of them were more or less derivative of Gibson's work. Really, the only exception would be Spielberg's D-Day sequence in Saving Private Ryan. It definitely ticks all 3 boxes, and it's just an A+++ battle. But that said, it didn't do too much by itself to revolutionize the art of the battle scene. But one film series did.
So it begins.
I dare you to go into that comment section and say that the Battle of Helm's Deep is not the most awesome shit ever. I double dog dare you. The Appendices, a series of excellent and unprecedented making-of documentaries about The Lord of the Rings, goes into excruciating detail about how Peter Jackson and his crew brought this battle to life, using a combination of practical effects, large-scale miniatures, and CGI. The weeks of grueling night shoots, the cutting-edge effects work, it was a monumental task, and it's nothing short of a miracle that it all came together perfectly. Despite the fact that this is a battle with orcs, elves, and magic, it never feels fake for a single moment. The Lord of the Rings trilogy changed cinema in many ways, but I think this battle was really the high point of the production's ingenuity, creativity, and storytelling acumen. With the leaps and bounds in digital effects technology that were to come, you'd think that the future would be bright, that filmmakers would utilize this new tool to dream up creative new set pieces for their battle scenes, and not forget that what makes action exciting isn't spectacle alone, but an emotional connection to the... Fuck! In a stroke of immense irony, the same director who crafted one of the best battles in living memory also single-handedly brought about the darkest era in the genre's history. Despite having many fantastic scenes and moments, The Return of the King is the weakest of the 3 Rings movies for several reasons. It's bloated, overlong, melodramatic, oddly paced, and relies way too much on digital effects during its battle scenes. Effects that, in my opinion, hold up just okay when compared to the more subtle use of CGI in the first 2 films. And there was a lot of that going on in the early 2000s. Filmmakers had a new toy, and they played with it so much that they broke it, stretching the primitive CGI of the day way beyond its limits. The Battle of Pelennor Fields here isn't terrible, but you see how easily the horses of the Rohirrim just slap aside the orcs? It feels unnatural. Like, wouldn't the horse react to the force of that impact? It's so clearly a cartoon, it just looks like crap. And while the camera angles during Helm's Deep were more or less grounded, quite literally, during Pelennor Fields, the camera is semi-permanently at this crazy airborne vantage point, one that you'd never be able to achieve outside of a computer program. And it's less immersive. It's prioritizing spectacle over the other 2 categories. So we've come full circle. After all of this experimentation, all this progress made by the likes of Eisenstein, Kubrick, and, yes, Gibson, we've regressed to the same basic principle that D.W. Griffith used. Bigger is better. Pretty soon, armies were swelling to the size of Mexico City. Big, sweeping wide shots once again became a battle scene mainstay. Historical epics and fantasy films got lumped together aesthetically. When you make enemy Persians just as monstrous as orcs and goblins, your film loses humanity. It loses grit. You could argue that this is a legitimate artistic choice. But in my opinion, the cavalry charge in Braveheart is a million times more exciting than seeing Gerard Butler cut through cartoon characters like butter. It was the final nail in the coffin of the genre, and thus, all seemed lost.
The sun is rising.
In 2011, a show called Game of Thrones premiered on HBO and quickly became more popular than Jesus. The first 5 seasons featured some exciting sword fights and extended battles, but it wasn't until Season 6, Episode 9, that the showrunners finally tackled their first proper battle sequence. The Battle of the Bastards is a conscious throwback to movies like Braveheart. In fact, the Mel Gibson references come pretty fast and thick throughout this entire scene.
Draw!
That was just kill our own men. Stand down.
You!
Archers.
I beg pardon, sire. Won't we hit our own troops?
Yes. But we'll hit theirs as well. We have reserves. Attack.
Run to your brother. The sooner you make it to him, the sooner you get to see him again.
Telo. Yan ano kaas to Paskol. Sunene este elo.
Come on, Rickon, zigzag! It's like this fucking kid hasn't even seen Apocalypto. Not only do we have realistic army sizes here, but also tangible stakes and rock-solid character motivations. For example, the detestable Ramsay Bolton kills Jon Snow's brother, well, cousin technically, but whatever, right in front of him, to goad Jon into making a tactical mistake, and it works. Y'all, that's what I mean by characters committed toward taking action. The technical execution is incredibly strong too. Shortly after the Stark and Bolton forces clash, there's this long take following Jon Snow through the chaos. This shot was made possible by utilizing digital effects sparingly. Obviously you can't do that to a real horse, unless you're Andrei Tarkovsky. Toward the end of the battle, tactics come into play. The showrunners have stated that they were inspired by the Battle of Cannae, when Hannibal surrounded and consequently destroyed 8 legions of Roman infantry. I don't think I've seen tactics play quite such a large role in an on-screen battle, and I think the trend should continue. But let's talk about the most recent battle to grace our screens. Very recent, in fact. It aired just days before this video was published. It's the biggest, longest battle ever put on film. It took 3 months to shoot, cost a stupid amount of money, and employed the most cutting-edge special effects of our age. And it sucks! Nah, it's okay. This battle is competent, but it's certainly no Battle of the Bastards. And I'd argue that just competent isn't really acceptable when you're talking about a major climactic moment of the biggest television show ever. This isn't even the best scene in TV depicting a major villain trying to kill someone in a wheelchair.
Last chance to look at me, Hector.
While it's probably too early to tell how the Battle of Winterfell will fit into film history, I can tell you that it only ticks 2 of my 3 boxes. The episode is an achievement, don't get me wrong, and the set pieces are tense and original. The character moments are strong. It reminded me of Dog Soldiers. This battle is much more in the vein of Dawn of the Dead than Alexander Nevsky. The tone is extremely dark.
When you're saying darker, are you guys talking about like the brightness of the picture?
Well, I don't want to speak for Rich. I think he was talking about the tone of the film. Rich, were you talking about the tone?
No, it was very hard to see.
That's right, Rich. Visually, it's a hot mess. The battles in Braveheart and Chimes at Midnight were super cutty and frenetic, but you always understood what the filmmakers were trying to convey. It's a fine line. If you make it too staccato, it just turns into chaos.
He had to know who was who and, what side they were on and film's camera direction. And making it as clear as possible, because those battles can just turn into chaos and then you get bored. You don't know what's going on.
Look at this shit. I have no idea what's going on here. It's just noise. And the battle continues like this for an hour and a half. I'd be willing to forgive this sin if the tactics of the battle were at least clear. But they're not. The tactics make no sense at all. Charging a wall of zombies with light cavalry? Okay. Fighting a numerically superior enemy out in the open when you could do it just as easily from behind a castle wall? Sorry, Grey Worm, your men died for nothing, not accounting for the Night King's ability to resurrect the recently deceased to fight for him? A trump card that he was always going to play? Ugh. And while it's debatable whether this battle was a fitting conclusion to the White Walker storyline, it definitely represents yet another regressive moment in the history of movie battles. It's just pretty disappointing. There's There's something about big battles that gets the blood pumping. The excitement, the danger, the epic scale. It captures the imagination. It's why kids, well, boys, let's face it, mostly boys, go out into the woods and fight their friends with plastic swords. Battle scenes appeal to the 9-year-old in all of us. In my country, USA, USA, and many others, life can be strictly rational, oppressively compartmentalized, and subject to the tyranny of daily routine. But there's nothing routine about a big fucking battle. It's easy to get lost in the dream of a more mythic time and place, to imagine yourself in a time when ships were made of wood and men were made of steel. Thanks to movies like Spartacus and shows like Game of Thrones, even skinny, spectacled nerds like me can indulge in this fantasy safely. And it is just that, a fantasy. If you've read even just a little bit about history, you'll know that there never really was a time when men were made of steel. You know perfectly well that it's all just nostalgia. But your inner 9-year-old doesn't. He's still out there in the woods, felling foes with a plastic sword.